You're watching the free version of SynthEyes Essentials. For projects and footage, head to BorisFX.com for the premium download. Hello and welcome to SynthEyes Essentials. My name is Christoph Zapletal and I will be your guide on this exploration of SynthEyes. SynthEyes can seem a little bit overwhelming in the beginning, but trust me, we will take this step by step. Now, camera tracking is a very technical process, and there will be classes where we'll talk about how cameras work, what lenses do to our image, and what is happening under the hood when we do our tracking. But before we delve into all of that, I want us to just get our feet a little bit wet within SynthEyes. So let's start up the software. We are greeted by this lovely splash screen, and on the top right corner we can choose to either start a new project, open an existing one, or import a project. Let's start a new project. Now, unlike other applications, SynthEyes will not open with an empty canvas, but the first thing it'll do is ask for the footage you want to work on. SynthEyes is doing this because the properties of your footage, for example, the frame rate, the aspect ratio, and so forth, lay the foundation for our project. It also saves you from entering a lot of values manually. So let's navigate to the location where you downloaded the footage and select it. With the pop-up that SynthEyes puts up now, we can see quite a lot of this information. SynthEyes recognizes the dimensions and aspect ratio. We can supply additional information, but that's something for a later class. Let's click OK so that we can start exploring SynthEyes. Like in any other application, we want to save our file first. The extension for SynthEyes files is .sni, and those will contain all the data that SynthEyes generates. Okay, so here we are inside of SynthEyes. And up on the top, you can see different tabs. SynthEyes refers to these as rooms. So right now, we are in the summary room, which is a great starting place to explore 3D tracking. One thing you'll notice is that down at the bottom, our time bar is slowly changing from this dark purple to gray. SynthEyes is caching the frames for smooth playback. Once that is done and the bar is all gray, we can playback the clip by either pressing the play button here or hitting spacebar on the keyboard. If your playback is too fast, like mine is now, stop the playback by pressing the stop button or hitting the spacebar on the keyboard again, and then go up to the view menu and change playback speed from frame by frame to normal speed. If we shuttle through our clip, we can see the drone flying up the hill, revealing this concrete base at the top. What I want us to do in this class is to track the movement of the drone and place a statue on top of the concrete base. Isn't that asking a bit much for a first class? Don't worry. SynthEyes actually can automate a lot of the steps that are needed for match-moving a scene. The big green auto button is a good starting point. Let's just press that and see what SynthEyes will do. Whoa, what has happened here? Well, when we hit that auto button, SynthEyes did two things, or rather two steps in a process. It tracked a lot of points in the image. That was the first step. Then, in the second step, it used the data of all these trackers to calculate where the camera actually would be in 3D space. This second step is called solving. So appropriately, SynthEyes moved us from the summary room to the solver room. And this room comes with a different viewer layout. Before, we just saw the image we were working on. Now SynthEyes made that image a little bit smaller and added 3 more views: top, front, and left. If you're already using a CG software like Maya or Houdini, these might seem familiar. If not, let me quickly explain. In the top 3 views, we are now looking at a 3D scene from 3 different angles. In all 3, we can see the camera and also the locations of the points that we tracked, now in 3D space. For now, let's focus in on the camera, literally. With the scroll wheel of your mouse, you can zoom into each view. If you want to pan, just press down the middle mouse button and move your mouse. Now that we are conveniently zoomed into all 3D views, we can see how the camera is moving along a blue path. And we can see that the movement makes sense in regard to what we are seeing in the 4th viewer in our camera view. Our scene is tilted in a weird way. But if, for example, the camera moves up here, we can also see a change on the blue path. So congratulations, you just performed your very first camera solve inside of SynthEyes. I want to get the weird tilting fixed as well, but first I want to keep the camera movement a little bit more refined. It looks good already, but with just a couple of tweaks we can make it even better. Now the first thing I want to get rid of are these two trackers on the drone pilot here. Why? Well, even though he's standing very still, humans have this tendency to move. And the one thing that we don't want when tracking a camera are trackers on moving objects. So just click the first of these bed trackers, then hold down Shift and click the second bed tracker to select them both. Then right-click and then the menu that pops up, select Delete Selected. But talking about moving objects, let's zoom into our camera image close in on the grass and plants growing on the hill. Once again, just use your mouse scroll wheel to zoom in there. There's quite some movement there as well, probably by a slight breeze of wind. But I don't want us spending hours identifying moving trackers from locked ones. Let SynthEyes do that for us instead. Either go up to the track menu and select the Cleanup Trackers dialog, or hit Shift-C on the keyboard. And like SynthEyes does so often, it presents us with a lot of options. Don't panic, we will delve into this menu a lot more later on. For now, just check the box for bad frames and then hit the Fix button. That will get rid of a lot of the bad tracking data that makes up our scene. Last but not least, I want SynthEyes to take any distortions to the image made by the lens into account. You might think, well, there's a lens room. And yes, we will have a whole class talking about lens distortion, and there we will spend a lot of time in the lens room. For now, it is enough for us to just check Calculate Lens Distortion. That way, SynthEyes will know to take distortion into account when calculating the camera of our scene. We made a couple of changes to our scene, but this looks exactly like we left it off right after we hit that auto button. That is because SynthEyes hasn't incorporated any of our changes into our solve yet. Before you hit go, open the drop-down menu right below the button and switch from automatic to refine, and then let's hit go. Now SynthEyes will take the solve we already created and optimize it based on all the changes we made. And we do see some changes in our 3D views. The points move ever so slightly and the error value below the go button drops a little bit. We will get into what the error value actually is later in the course, but this is a good thing. So now we are left with orientating our scene. What do I mean by that? Let's zoom in really close. We can see a bunch of yellow points in all three 3D views that are arranged almost like a floor. It looks like the camera is moving towards this floor, then moves back up, and then back towards it. That is not really what is happening in our scene. In our scene, the drone is flying towards the hill, then moves up, and then continues on its original path. The movement itself is not wrong, but SynthEyes has just not got the right idea yet what is up and what is down in our 3D environment. Let's make this even more obvious by switching to the quad perspective view. If you don't see an image in the bottom right window, hover over it with your mouse and press L on your keyboard. We do see a grid overlay, but it is weirdly angled in our scene. We want to bring this into a place where it is much more useful for us to navigate the scene. SynthEyes terminology for this process is setting up a coordinate system. SynthEyes tried to do that automatically when we hit the auto button. But SynthEyes doesn't see a sky and a ground and a hill, just a bunch of trackers distributed in 3D space. On the hill, there were a lot of trackers on a similar plane, so SynthEyes assumed this to be the ground. There are many ways to set up a coordinate system in SynthEyes, but we will opt for a very simple one, the *3 method. For that, we will switch to the coordinates room. What are all these numbers? Don't panic, we will replace them in a minute. Those are the coordinates of the trackers that SynthEyes falsely identified as a flaw, and they are called constraints. Basically, when we change anything to our solve, SynthEyes will constrain these changes to the values here, meaning that those are not to be changed. So to set up a new coordinate system, we need to give SynthEyes new values to work with. Shuttle to the end of our scene, where we can see the top of the hill. Select the *3 button, and SynthEyes will warn us that our scene has already got constraints applied, and if we want to remove them. Yes, we do. The list empties and also the *3 changes to OR. OR stands for origin. That means the center of our 3D environment. Click this tracker here. It'll turn red and our *3 button changes once more to LR, which is short for left-right. So SynthEyes wants us to select a point that is either to the left or to the right of the origin point. And once again, the selected tracker turns red and our button changes to PL for plane. So now we are expected to select a tracker that is nearer or further away from the origin point in regards to the distance, but still on the same height as our origin. This one looks pretty promising. As this was the last of the 3 points, SynthEyes will ask if we should apply the new coordinate system. Yes, please. The solver will do a quick calculation, and now our perspective view in the bottom right changes dramatically. Congratulations, we just defined the ground plane for our scene. That will make navigating our scene so much easier. Zoom into each window once more and take a look. You will find that the points in each view now resemble the hill much more closely, and also the camera path looks like what is happening in the camera viewer. Perfect. Now let's bring in some geometry to see if this really works out. Make sure you're aligned to the center of our scene. If you're unsure, notice how the 2 center lines on the grid are just a tiny bit thicker than all the other lines. Also, the tracker that we selected as our origin should have a yellow cross in the middle. Switch on over to the 3D room, where we can add a statue to our scene. From the drop-down menu here, we can select the earthling and put it into the top view. Just drag it in there until it's the size you like. Of course, we want him to stand on the concrete base and not on the gravel next to it. Now we can select the Translate tool and move our earthling onto the concrete base. As we don't have a tracker on the base itself, we will need to put it there manually. I will jump between the different 3D views and translate it into place. If you ever lose your bearings where you are, just right-click in that window and choose Zoom to Fill. Now aligning the height of our statue might be tricky, especially if you're new to 3D navigation. Here's a little tip for you. Shuttle to around frame 54. There we are pretty perpendicular to the base, and translating in either the front or left-right view will be much easier. Now let's just switch our layout back to the camera view. Looking at this is nice, but we want to get the sky, the camera, and the trackers out to either a CG or compositing application. At the end of this course, we will have a couple of classes on how to properly export to a number of host apps, but for now, just to properly finish out our very first venture into SynthEyes, we are going to export this scene to After Effects. If we go up to File, Export, we see that SynthEyes has export options to virtually any CG or compositing application. We are looking for the JavaScript exporter to After Effects. This JavaScript has got the great advantage of doing all the groundwork for us, making sure that After Effects gets the correct link to the footage used, the camera, the trackers, and even our little earthling. There are just 2 things we might want to check first. Make sure that the tracker count is set to 0. Seems counterintuitive, but SynthEyes will understand 0 as no limit, making sure that all our trackers are sent over to After Effects. We can leave the rest of those settings as is, but at the very bottom, just make sure to pick the Redistorted to Lens workflow. And yes, as I earlier said, we will get into all the nooks and crannies of lens distortion in a later class. For now, we can admire our scene in After Effects with a lens distortion plugin, a number of null objects representing all our trackers from SynthEyes, a moving camera, and, last but not least, our lovingly placed earthling on top of our concrete base. In this class, we learned how to track and solve our shot using the Auto button. We also got our first closer look at the rooms concept of SynthEyes, and we experienced how calculating lens distortion improves our solve. Last but not least, we aligned our scene and placed some geometry into it. Now this might be a lot to go through in a first class, but that way you already know your first way around SynthEyes, and also what we are aiming for when we talk about trackers, solves, and coordinate systems. So please, play around with this scene, get comfortable in SynthEyes, and when you're ready, join me in class number 2, where we will talk about some of the underlying concepts of matchmoving. See you there.